100,000 subscribers. Thank you so much to everyone that supported me throughout this entire journey. It's been absolutely incredible. In celebration, I thought that I would answer some of your most potent questions, and so I've reached out to you via Patreon, Twitter and Facebook, and this is what this video is. I've decided not to do it in my general office, as it were, even though it's just a backdrop, because it is such a gorgeous day. Why not get out? I'm going to show you a little scene of Portsmouth. You probably can't see it properly now. It looks absolutely terrible. Before we get into questions, I want to show you something. I've shown my patrons this, but I haven't shown the world at whole. I've got a tattoo of Rationality rules on my shoulder, and I also got one of the word atheist, which is one of the first renditions, and people which were referred to as such then was put to death. This one I've wanted for about 10 years, and it's to represent a thank you to everyone that's made it so that we can actually have these conversations. It's very easy to forget the positions that we're in and what people had to go through in order to get what we have. And this one, the Rationality Rules one, is because I'm an egomaniac. No, it's because it represents more than just a channel to me. It represents my perspective on the world and, you know, what I'm trying to achieve, my pursuit of truth for truth's sake. The tattoo artist that did both of these is called Sykes. I've linked in the description to his Instagram. Please check it out, even though most of you live in America and so will never get a tattoo from Sykes. Give him a follow. It's nice to be able to help someone out. First question, Atheist Messiah asks, would you rather fight 100 duck-sized Jordan Petersons or one Jordan Peterson-sized duck? That's such a complicated question that it's very hard to get to the metaphorical substrate of it. I guess the answer has to be Raskolnikov. Jokes aside, it depends on what you mean by duck, and one, and you. Second question, Daniel asks, what are your hobbies and interests beyond YouTube? I'm an avid video gamer. I play video games quite a lot, from World of Warcraft to Dead by Daylight. Gaming is definitely a factor for me. It's a good way for me to socialise with friends as well. I frequently go to the cinema. I enjoy watching films. I've got a cinema card so that I can go whenever I want, and it's just all covered in one price. I like exercise. I may not look like it, but I do like exercise. I enjoy lifting weights. It's good fun. It's nice to hit a personal record. It's a good way to socialise with friends. I'm also nerdy enough to play Dungeons and Dragons on occasion, and that's fun. I enjoy it. Again, it's a good time to relax with friends. Friends are pretty much the most important thing in life for me, and so a lot of my hobbies revolve around friends, such as gaming. I do table tennis, and I'm about a century younger than the average person who plays, so that's good fun. In fact, of all the religious people I meet, it tends to be the people at table tennis because of that difference in age. It's quite peculiar. Aaron asks, can you please get on the Joe Rogan podcast? Huge audience, spread the message of being logical. I would absolutely love to be on the Joe Rogan podcast, but I don't know how to go around that. I don't think I've nearly got enough followers. I don't know how it works. I'm not so good at that business side of things. I tend to do what I enjoy, and should opportunities present themselves, that's when I capitalise on them. But I would so love to be on the Joe Rogan podcast. I tell you what, tweet him. Just send him tweets, bombard him saying that they should get me on, and if that happens, then that happens. But I do know that at one point I'd like to speak with Joe Rogan. I think he's a wonderful person. His approach to conversations is brilliant. There's a few topics I of course disagree with him on, but the beauty is that he's having those conversations, and he will have them and debate them, and he will appeal to evidence. He's a good guy, and his podcast is easily the most viewed by me. If that makes sense. Conrad asks, where are you on the political compass? Here I am. This is where I currently am according to the website that you linked. And Alex asks, where do you feel you fit on the political spectrum? So as for where I personally put myself, it tends to be centre-left. I'm certainly not far on the left. For example, I voted for Brexit. And yes, I was called a racist by just about everyone for doing so, despite what reasons I presented, which is problematic to say the least. But I am in general left. I tend to be towards a liberal agenda. I would not call myself a libertarian. I think libertarianism has serious faults, if I'm honest. But also, I'm not super educated on this topic, and so that's why I tend not to touch it, just FYI. Politics 1909 asks, do you consider making videos on politics, and why do/don't you? Yes, I do consider making political videos. I nearly made several when it came to Brexit, for example. I wanted to show that there was a really logical case for it. The reason I didn't is politics is a whole different game to philosophy and religion and to statements of fact. It comes down to value judgments, and value judgments are based on many values that people don't necessarily hold with the same level of conviction, would probably be the right way to put it. But the main reason is that whenever I hear people who are fantastic in one area speak about politics, or sometimes just an area where they're not so fantastic or not so well known, it tends to be devastating. And the best example I have of this is Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins, when it comes to evolution, is brilliant. And when it comes to deflating religion, as it were, he is a very good example of firebrand. But when it comes to politics, I'm really disappointed by him, and I don't want people to feel that I've completely missed the point on some areas. What it ultimately comes down to is that I can be sure that, say, the Kalam cosmological argument is inaccurate, that the person making it is committing flaws, because it isn't based on value judgments, it isn't based on numerous factors. Whereas when it comes to politics, I just don't know enough. And I think politics should really start with the moral philosophers, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, and most people that speak about politics don't even know these people. And yet, that is really where affirmative action and all the rest comes into it. So that's why I don't tend to speak on politics. But with that said, I do say quite a lot about free speech and politics. And so I'm very much against this far left agenda of being able to shut down conversations because they disagree with people. The reason I make political videos in that case is because that is a slippery slope, a very slippery slope, and I can't have any conversations at all. I can't criticize anyone or any argument at all if I don't have free speech. And so that's why I've made several videos relating to free speech. The next question comes from Soulist, who asks, what do you believe is the best argument for God? Which is a similar question to Fraser, who asks, what's the most convincing or hard to debunk theist claim that you've come across? So the best argument for a God, in my opinion, has to be the watchmaker analogy from William Paley. Because before Darwin, before we knew how life could be as complex and seemingly purposed as it is, it's very, very easy to look at us and assume that there must have been some kind of creative force involved, because we are so complicated, as is, this grass here, even these rocks, everything is just so complicated and seemingly purposed that it's very, very hard to look at that and think that there is not a creator. The problem is that I say it's an argument for God, it's not. It's an argument for a creator, and it doesn't tell you anything about it. So that creator wasn't necessarily omnipotent or omnipresent, it just could have been a creator. It tells us that it may have been many creators, that they may now be dead, because if we find a car, we know it's created by a human. It doesn't tell us that human's alive still. In fact, you can't get any information like that. But before Darwin, there's a reason why many people weren't atheists. They were deists, which means they realised that religion is bullshit, specifically theism. But not many people made it to atheism. There's a handful. Jeremy Bentham, again, is one of them. Wonderful, incredible individual. If you to anyone that for some reason doesn't know much about Jeremy Bentham, you should check him out. He was so far ahead of the game. Flo asks, seeing how there are less and less religious people out there, what will it take for religion to die out, especially considering what a big part of culture/society it is in some countries? So when will religion go extinct, huh? There's some great names out there, like Freud, who said that basically it will be when our fear of death comes to an end. I don't personally think religion's going to go anywhere until we start editing our genetic makeup and having a culture in which truth really is of the most highest value, or very high value at least, perhaps just behind well-being. The reason for that is that we just haven't evolved to figure out the universe as it is. We've evolved to be able to successfully reproduce, and within that there's no reason for us to understand the universe as it is. There's every reason to think that we are more important than what we are, and we have evolved to fear death. We don't want to die. We don't want our life to be, in the grand scheme of things, basically pointless. Some guy asks, what are your epistemological and moral axioms? Do you have faith in them, or do you think your axioms are reasonable? Very good question, and one that I'm just not going to be able to succinctly and adequately answer within this video. But what I do have is my next video is dedicated to morality, and specifically why it's objective in the scientific sense, and so that will answer your question to a large extent. I of course have an axiomatic morality, but while most people say, what are your axiomatic assumptions? Mine are not assumptions, and if they are, show me and I will get rid of them. What they are is axiomatic facts. People tend to think that in the context of morality, we're born with a blank slate. This is not true. It's absolutely not true. And we're slowly waking up to this thanks to people like Steven Pinker and the general debate as a whole. And you know what? Jordan Peterson is to an extent helping out here, not through his work himself, but by getting others to take on some of his flaws with militant atheism, as he calls it, or celebrity atheists, or whatever kind of angle you want to take. What it comes down to is that you and I are born with the capacity to feel pain. That's an axiomatic fact, not assumption. And you want to avoid it. That is a fact, not an assumption. Now, it's very easy to say, no, it's subjective because it's to do with your feelings, but this comes down to an equivocation fallacy regarding the word feelings. We could use feelings to mean one's state of conviction, or we can use feelings to mean the expression of physiological things that we can verify objectively, being in pain, for example. I'll explain this all much more in detail in my next video. Andrew asks, can you elaborate on why Harris thinks the is-ought distinction is spurious? That's another very good question. In short, I don't want to answer for Sam, because while I consider myself a disciple of Sam, he is far beyond me. He's a very, very intelligent individual. I think he will be remembered long after almost everyone alive today is gone. He will be a case of someone who wasn't really appreciated as much as he should have been in his time, in my opinion. But with that said, when it comes to Hume's is-ought distinction, one of the biggest mistakes people make is that they equate it to the naturalistic fallacy, and that's not what Hume was saying. In fact, Hume wasn't actually saying much at all, because if you look at his notes, it's not like he produced an essay on this. It was more of a backhanded comment to slap people of his time with his classic sarcasm. So if I was to say, or if anyone was to say, that we ought to allow rape in our culture, because it is the case that people rape in the wild, or that animals rape in the wild, that would be a naturalistic fallacy. That's saying that things ought to be a certain way because it is that way in nature. That's not what Hume was saying. Hume was saying that you can't say that someone ought to do something based on the way something is, and I think he's incorrect, and as does Harris. For example, you could be somebody who is deep down homosexual, and I could come up to you and say, or we could have a conversation in which you say that you practice a heterosexual life, and I could say you ought to consider homosexual relationships, and the reason you ought to do so is because it is the case that you are attracted to males or females or whatever it might be. That is an ought from an is, and that's why Hume was wrong, and that's the perspective, as I understand it, that Harris is approaching it from. This needs more of a conversation, and it's something, again, I'm going to tap into much more in my next video, and I will probably have subsequent conversations with minds greater than mine who can basically berate me from different angles. Next question is from Curious. What are your thoughts on Cosmic Skeptic's new video about morality and whether it is objective or subjective? It would be interesting to find your opinion on the matter. Your question is in good company because a lot of people have asked me the same over the last couple of days. In short, there's some big disagreements that I have with Alex, but they're not so much disagreements with his approach, it's more to do with the way in which he's looking at things. He's demanding off morality something that he does not demand off other areas of science, of other areas of discourse. And I think that's something that a lot of people do, including myself when I was younger. I don't mean that as a condescending comment either, because Alex is an incredibly intelligent young man, far more intelligent than I was at his age, and he has a brilliant future ahead of him. I'm sure you'll agree with me. My next video, again, is to do with morality. I suspect that we will have a conversation in Oxford or down here in Portsmouth where we can iron out our disagreements and really bring in the context of moral philosophers, because I think that's absent at the present. But in short, again, with Alex, it was a fantastic video, as always. But big disagreements from me. Next question is from Calculated Failure. What's your thoughts on nihilism? Nihilism. You guys are really giving me the big topics, right? Again, I'm not going to be able to sufficiently address it within this video, but the fact that so many of you seem to be showing interest in this topic means that maybe I will make a video specifically dedicated to it, where I can fully address all of the concerns that people have, all of the arguments for nihilism. The problem the primary problem is that there's many different types. Existential nihilism tends to be the most popular. People specifically suffer from nihilism when they've been born into a world or have been convinced of a world in which there is absolute objective purpose. So it tends to be people who were previously religious in some form. To learn that there is no grand purpose for you, to them, can render everything as meaningless. This isn't the case, and it's not even the case for them, and I can show that, which I will in a video to come. But in short, you have objective purpose. It's based on objective evidence that can be verified and tested by other people, especially as our sciences advance. Which is to say that there's some facts that we can't yet get a hold of, but they are still objectively a fact. Bit of a weird play with language, I understand that, but I'll elaborate at another time. My purpose, for example, is to enjoy my life, is to make the universe better for sentient entities than it currently is. It's to enjoy friendship, to travel the world, and to make a difference. All of this gives me great purpose. It makes me very happy. Now, what does it matter that I'm probably going to be forgotten within 1,000 years? Just gone. That's it. Gone. Does that mean that it's meaningless? No, it doesn't. It does not mean that it's meaningless. Is it meaningless in the sense that in the grand scheme of things? Perhaps. But that's a different type of nihilism to the one that people are perpetuating. Colin asks, I like what Jordan Peterson says on almost everything except religion and morality. This puts me in a bind as I want to bring others' attention to him, but doing so might bring more attention to these absurd views. Do you think Jordan's overall effect is positive or negative? So first off, join the club. The amount of people I've spoken to who value Jordan Peterson, they like what he has to say, except for on the topic of morality and religion, is staggering. It's a hell of a lot of people, and to a large extent I consider myself among them. But as for your primary question, which is do I think Jordan Peterson is a force for good, I'm not sure. I'm not sure is probably the best answer I can give. He's causing people to have discussions about topics that are very interesting and not adequately addressed. But when he talks about them, it's quite bad. When it comes to his positions on SJWs, on free speech, I'm with him, and I think he's doing a fantastically good job. The problem is that the left is creating this environment in which people like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson are put on stilts as if they are supremely intellectual, when they're not. And people think that that extends to other domains of discourse, and it doesn't. with that said, while I don't think Jordan Peterson is doing good work when it comes to morality and religion, I do think he's raising good questions and good concerns that aren't adequately addressed by previous thinkers, by our state as a society at the present. But the best thing about that is that it leaves gaps for people to come in and answer those questions and to address them accordingly. Brett Weinstein has done a fantastic job of taking Jordan Peterson's truth and turning it into something that is practical, pragmatic, and not tied to woo-woo Christianity. That's one example. But is Jordan Peterson a force for good? I don't know. Graham asks, are SJWs as dangerous to democracies as Peterson claims? Yes, I would say that SJWs and that far left agenda is as dangerous to democracy as Jordan Peterson and others have said. It's really unfortunate, but as Brendan O'Neill has very rightfully pointed out, we face a generation, or even two generations, of people who have been schooled against Enlightenment thought, and we're making the same mistakes, or they're making the same mistakes that we've seen through history again and again and again. Fighting for free speech is the most important. Free speech is the most important value. There's no two ways about that. It is the one that allows us to enact and defend all other rights. And so the fact that in the name of progress, in the name of meritocracy, in the name of equal opportunity, people are shutting down conversations to criticize the policies that they're trying to perpetuate, that's fucking dangerous. That's really, really dangerous. And so on that front, yeah, I'm very much convinced that Jordan Peterson is correct. The Logos asks, Jordan Peterson asserts in his first book, Maps of Meaning, that action presupposes valuation. The individual cannot live without belief, without action and valuation, and science cannot provide that belief. Your thoughts and response to this quote would be interesting. Yes, action presupposes value. So you have to have values before you deliberately act. So if you was to do the action of eating, it's because you value the food, because you want the sustenance to live. You know, if you do the act of getting in bed comfortably to sleep, it's because you value sleep. It's because you value the rest that will come from getting into that position, from having and doing those actions. Jordan's correct when he says that. He's not the first to make that observation, of course. Moral philosophers have said the same for a very long time. But as for the point about science not being able to give you these values, of course, science is a methodology. It's a way in which we objectively tell the truth, depending on how you define the word truth, of the environment we're in. It's how you can objectively verify and prove to someone that something is or is not the case. Does it have value in and of itself? No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. But we are born with value. That's an axiomatic fact, not assumption. We have values of eating, values of understanding the world. The best way to understand the world is the scientific method. Hybrid asks two questions. The first being, what are your thoughts on the philosophy of veganism at this stage? Do you plan to perhaps create some videos in regards to this topic? And his second question is, what is the most convincing ethical argument for veganism in your opinion? So we've spoken about the controversial topic of morality and nihilism, and so I guess it makes sense that veganism comes up next. In short, I think that veganism is the most rational, logical, and reasonable and consistent position that there is when it comes to morality, and I think I can make an objective case for it as well, which I will do in my next video. But as for creating videos specifically to do with veganism, I'm not sure that I will. I might at some point. If I do, the first videos I will make will have something to do with halal and kosher meat, because even if you eat meat, Jesus Christ, you should boycott that. It's just barbaric. It's so horrible. That's where some kind of compassion for non-human animals should probably start, because it's hard to find someone that can justify that who's not religious. As for the most convincing argument for veganism, it falls into the name the trait game. Get someone to name a trait as a justification for why one species should be exempt from abduction, torture, rape, and murder. while every other species falls into that purview. Because I've never seen it done. It always gets dragged into this combination of traits such as being able to sign a social contract, well-being, conscious thought, as if that matters, and intellect as a whole. None of these factors mean anything at all other than well-being. And if you take well-being, you have to extend it to other creatures, specifically mammals, that can feel pain with very similar levels to us, but with the exception of psychological anguish, because you have to be able to understand what a threat is before you can adequately be scared of such a situation. William asks, since we can live perfectly healthy lives without animal products, is there any rational defence for eating meat, or using leather, etc. for that matter? Don't want to sound like some vegan nutjob, but I've seen both Harris, Dawkins and Krauss struggle to defend eating meat themselves, whilst all continuing to do so. Would be interesting to see your views on this. So again, morally speaking, no, I see no justification at all. But I do have a problem with the way in which you've phrased your question, because it presumes that veganism is a very healthy lifestyle. I'm not entirely convinced that's the case, and that could be entirely due to ignorance on my part. I need to do more research. But I have seen plenty of studies showing that vegetarian and pescatarian diets do very well for longevity. They're really good for us, but the omnivorous and vegan diets tend to perform quite bad. The NHS released a study where I don't know how many people it was, but it's a hell of a lot. I'll link it on screen now, and I shall put a link in the description to the study. So, presuming that veganism is as healthy as a vegetarian lifestyle and pescatarian lifestyle, there really is no justification at that point. Craig asks, do you think it's morally justifiable to eat meat or keep pets? So I've already answered the former part of the question, but as for the latter, to do with pets, I don't know. And I think there's a difference between owning a pet that necessarily has to kill animals, has to eat meat, and one that doesn't. So for example, if you was to have a pet rabbit, that's not as bad as having a pet cat. However, cats are my favourite animals. I find them to be adorable. Is there a way in which I can justify having an animal that necessarily must have meat to survive? By the way, in case you're inclined to say that cats don't eat meat, come on, you're not doing anyone favours here. Ultimately, I don't know, and I have to do more research. Next question is from Curtis. If you could make one change to the world, what would you change? Another good question. You're not making this easy for me. Thank you. What would I change if I could change anything at all? I think it would have something to do with, almost certainly would have something to do with sentience and sentient entities. If there's anything that we should worry about in this universe, it's experiencing pain. Pain is the ultimate sovereign master of everything. So what would I change? I'd be tempted to make it so that sentience wasn't a thing, so that no one felt anything. So essentially, I turn the universe off. I would consult others before doing as much, and I would considerably think this through. But as a whimsical answer, that's what I would change. Nate Talks to You asks, in the US, atheism is typically associated with the left. Do you have any ideas on how to make atheism more socially acceptable on the right as to undo this stereotype? Interesting question, Nate, and hi, by the way, I'm a fan. So, I think what's going on is it's not arbitrary. The right tend to be religious and the left tend to be non-religious. I think that's not an accident. If you think about it, the right tends to be about conservatism. It tends to have more rules and regulations. It depends on where we're talking here as well, because UK right is different to American right. But I think what goes hand in hand is that if you think the universe has very specific laws that are preordained, that there are edicts that do not change, that there are conversations that should not be had because the answers are already here, in other words, that you're religious, then I can understand why you would fall towards the right as it's traditionally conceived. Whereas when you figure out things are not quite that simple and there needs to be lots more conversations, and ultimately we want to allow people to have as much freedom as possible before we have justification to take that away. You're going to naturally fall towards the left. So I think the divide it's not arbitrary, and I think that to a large extent there's not much we can do about it. Yanis asks, are you optimistic about the future? Do you think humanity will be in a better place in 50 years? You know, I'm tempted to say an ecstatic yes, based on works such as Steven Pinker's most recent books. But I'm also tempted, or my more rational mind is telling me no. I'm not so optimistic. I'm deeply, deeply concerned about the death of Enlightenment values. And if it keeps going the way it's going, I see us regressing as we've seen regressive states in history as a whole. You know, the Greeks were so far ahead and it just fell into depravity because certain values were not held as values anymore, because there was a change in education on perspective. And I see a change of perspective in our environment. It's very hard when you are so close into the painting, which I am and you are, it's hard to see the frame. And so maybe these feelings of doubt are natural, and everyone is predisposed to think things are worse than what they are and going to get worse than what they are. Moving on, Alan asks, what websites do you like to use to read scientific articles or use to fact check your material? Ultimately, it depends on what I'm researching. If I'm trying to have an objective scientific conversation, if I'm trying to present a scientific case, it's always going to be scientific peer-reviewed papers that I look through and what I reference. You need to watch out because there's some pay-to-play peer-reviewed papers out there, but I'll link in the descriptions the ones that are good. It can be quite hard to read scientific papers, by the way, until you get the knack of it. Just warning you, just in case you haven't tried so before. But as far as websites in general which are good for knowledge, the best by far is Wikipedia. We're taught in schools in the UK, and I assume over the world, Wikipedia is a bad thing, it's going to be wrong, it can be changed by anyone. But this is a myth to a large extent, because schools and education want you to learn. They don't want you to simply regurgitate what you've read off Wikipedia. And so that's why they keep you off them. But really, Wikipedia is fantastic. It tends to have an abundance of references that you can check, which are in and of themselves other things, other websites to read. And it tends to be factually accurate. So if one of the best things you can do if you want to start becoming smarter is to learn to read the language level of Wikipedia in general, because it's slightly above like general newspapers, and then read Wikipedia pages, read Wikipedia articles. It's a fantastic website. It's one of the best things we have. And finally, Solaris asks, what are your favourite other content creators? I always feel bad answering questions like this because I'm bound to miss out so many fantastic creators, and also I don't want to bore you guys by just naming everyone that I listen to and everyone that I recommend. So I give you some of my favourites. I very much enjoy Cosmic Skeptics content. Sam Harris, Brett Weinstein. Brett Weinstein is truly, truly fantastic, very smart person. Same is true with the other two, and all of the rest I'm going to say as well. So Matt Dillahunty, fantastic to listen to, really good content. And if you're into philosophy, if you're into atheism, if you're into irreligion, you know who Matt is surely. Others would be counter-arguments. I really enjoy counter-arguments. I had the opportunity to, I've collaborated with counter-arguments, and they are fantastic, and their content is just great. Holy Kool-Aid, my colleague at this point, Thomas Westbrook, fantastic. And the same is true of Rachel Oates. She brings a unique perspective, and her I hope she doesn't mind my saying, but her emotional approach is really nice, and it will resonate with a lot more people than the hardline atheism that perhaps people associate me with. And then you've got people a little bit not so far in the same genre as me, but similar, like Professor Stick, great content. Godless Cranium, Oh gosh, like I said, there's so many I'm gonna miss. Lloyd Evans, very cool if you want to get an inside look at how Jehovah's Witnesses work. Yeah, there's many areas, there's many people, I just could not name enough. I'm sorry if I've missed you out. So to wrap up, I'm gonna get my arse off this rock because, oh my gosh, I can't feel my butt anymore. There's Portsmouth in the background, I think you can see it. I just want to thank you all again for all of your support. 110,000 subs at the present. You're making me achieve dreams that I didn't even know I had. So thank you so much for your support, and hopefully we can go further. Until next time, my fellow apes, until next time.